Hey, welcome. Today we're going to break down a really pivotal 1981 sermon by Reverend Sun Myung Moon. It was delivered on a day he called Historical Children's Day, and it gives us this unique way of looking at the human condition, and of course what he claims is the solution. So let's just dive right in. So, right at the heart of this entire sermon is this one really powerful idea, that there's this profound disconnect, this gap between humanity and God. And according to this text, the whole point of religion isn't just about, personal salvation. It's about actively trying to bridge this massive gap in understanding and feeling. All right, so if we're going to understand the solution that's being proposed here, we've got to first understand the core problem. So let's take a look at what actually created this gap in the first place. The sermon points to this one specific moment in history it calls the fall of man as the origin of this whole separation. And the real tragedy, as it's described here, isn't just that the fall happened, it's that humanity is now so far from its original standard that we don't even realize how serious the problem actually is. Now, what's really fascinating here is the analogy they use. The sermon compares our spiritual state to a patient who has cancer but doesn't even know it. They're just going about their life, feeling totally normal, completely unaware that there's this destructive force working from the inside. It's a powerful way to illustrate the point that the problem is severe, it's internal, and for the most part, it's completely unrecognized. So if humanity is sick and doesn't know it, what's the first step? Well, a proper diagnosis, right? And the sermon lays out a very specific three-part analysis of what went wrong as a result of the fall. So the text identifies these three core consequences that kind of spiral out from the fall. First, the self suddenly becomes the center of the whole universe. Second, that leads to this desire to control everything for yourself. And third, it establishes something the sermon calls a false lineage. So let's break down what each of those really mean. So the crucial point here is that these aren't just seen as individual flaws, but as inherited conditions. The sermon's arguing that self-centeredness and this greedy desire for domination became our default settings, and it's all tied to what it calls a contaminated lineage. This idea that these traits aren't just learned, they're actually passed down, creating an inherited nature that just keeps self-centeredness going from one generation to the next. With that diagnosis clear, the sermon then introduces this central metaphor to explain how temptation operates in this fallen world, a world that it describes as being filled with hooks. The idea here is that temptation isn't just random. No, it's strategic. It's like we all have these vulnerabilities, these little niches, as the sermon calls them, and these hooks are designed to snag us right where we're weakest. The world is presented as this landscape of carefully placed bait. And this illustrates the danger so vividly. The sermon compares this whole battle against temptation to tuna fishing. A fisherman gives the tuna all kinds of bait, right? Tempting it, until the tuna thinks, oh, I'll just have one little bite, I won't get caught. But with that one bite, it's over. It's a really stark warning about how deceptive giving in to temptation can be. So the sermon doesn't just identify these three main satanic hooks, it also gives us their direct opposites, the heavenly antidotes, you could call them. The temptation to misuse love is countered by sacrificial love. Material greed is countered by serving other people. And arrogance is countered by humility. The whole goal is to kind of reshape your internal niches so that only the heavenly hooks can grab on. Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem, we've seen the mechanism of temptation. Now let's get to the solution. How does someone actually win this internal war against all those hooks? This is the central question, isn't it? If these tendencies are inherited and the world is just full of temptations, how can any one person possibly break free from that? And the answer it proposes is, well, it's startlingly direct. It's not about some complex ritual or secret knowledge. The core principle for winning this war is a strategy of complete reversal. To unwind something, you have to reverse the exact procedure that was used to wind it up in the first place. So what does this reverse action actually look like in practice? The sermon outlines a really clear path. It starts with declaring war on your own self-centeredness. This means actively choosing to live for others, using your things for their benefit, and consistently putting yourself in a sacrificial position. The goal is to basically smooth over those satanic niches and create heavenly pockets instead. This quote is presented as the personal credo that really underpins this entire struggle. The ultimate victory, according to this text, isn't controlling the world, but controlling yourself. That's the foundational battle that has to be won first. Now, winning this internal war isn't just an individual goal. The sermon brings it all together by connecting this personal transformation to a collective, new era for the entire community. And this is a fascinating turn.
The focus shifts from a vertical relationship, following a leader, to a horizontal one. The highest priority is no longer just obedience, but actively caring for and uniting with each other. The community itself becomes the real focus.
And this is where the number 12 becomes incredibly significant. The sermon explains that by serving 12 different types of people, representing the full spectrum of humanity, a person earns a pass to enter all 12 gates of heaven. It's a very tangible goal for achieving that spiritual freedom. This quote just summarizes the ultimate goal so beautifully. The sermon argues that God's greatest joy doesn't come from being worshipped directly, but from seeing his children, humanity, loving and caring for each other. The focus is really on the unity of the family.
And so the sermon's entire logic brings us right here, to this final question. It starts with this vast gap between God and humanity, and it ends with a vision for closing it, not through individual piety, but through collective love. And it really leaves you to wonder, what would a world that's actually built on that single principle, what would it really look like?